enforcement processes. Are there any other items commissioners would like to have on the agenda for our briefing meeting? Okay, great. If there's time, if we get through the other agenda items, we have on our 5 o'clock agenda a discussion about the Affordable Housing Committee goals, and we have just a few slides there. If we have time, I'd like to maybe just kind of walk through those real quickly, just to see if there's any questions, just share. There were a few final updates made to the goals just in the last few days, so we could show those if we have time, and I think we might, just based on the time expected on the other items. Are there any questions about any items on the regular meeting agenda? All right, well then let's get started, and our first staff update is Stacy Saunders is going to provide the update on COVID-related work.
Thank you again, Commissioners, and our community members who are listening in for the time today to provide you an update. My message today will sound a little like a repeat, but a repeat of really good news. Our local indicators continue to improve as Omicron surge continues to fade. Here's our epi curve starting at the beginning of May, just so you can focus in a little bit more on that latter part where you can clearly see the impact of Omicron, and also as you approach that March 1, how very quickly we've gotten down to a low level. Our case rate has now fallen below 100 and is currently 51 new cases per 100,000 per week. This is down 65% from the last time I presented on March 1st. Our percent positivity continues to decrease and is now 4.7, so we've fallen below the 5%. 2 additional deaths were added to the dashboard this past week, and this is a decline over a plateau for 2 weeks prior. Hospitalizations continue to be low and favorable, with both inpatient beds occupied with COVID-19 and ICU utilization well below our alert levels. Our local metrics seen here are all moving or have already moved into very favorable areas, and so you can see a lot more of the green now. We still have our case rate still in that orange area. When we look at the CDC community level tool, it's still showing Buncombe County in the medium, although I do suspect that we'll see that come down in the next week or so. With current high levels of vaccination and high levels of population immunity, both from vaccination and previous infection, we know that the risk of medically significant disease, hospitalizations, and death from COVID-19 is reduced. At the same time, we know that some people in our communities, such as our elders, people who are immunocompromised, and people with disabilities are still at a higher risk for serious illness. So the COVID-19 community level tool can help communities and individuals make decisions based on those risks. In this medium status, no community or population-wide recommendation, mask recommendations are provided. What is provided is individuals with underlying health conditions. There is a recommendation that they may still want to continue wearing a mask in indoor spaces when a county is in medium. In this medium area, it is still recommended to seek testing if exposed or having symptoms, and to be up to date on vaccines. The community level tool puts emphasis on the burden of COVID-19 within a community by first looking at week over week cases, then places greater emphasis on hospitalizations than the other metrics that we were previously following. And these are precisely the measures that at this phase in the pandemic, we locally have also been moving to. You've heard me say for a few weeks now that our emphasis is going to be around reducing severe illness, hospitalizations, and deaths. So as such, public health will be migrating to the community level tool and sunsetting our local metrics. It just makes sense now to do this because we believe moving to the community tool is aligned with the direction that we've all been moving into since the beginning of 2022, with an emphasis on COVID burden and hospitalization, so that severe illness pieces. So COVID-19 will continue to be a part of our lives going forward. We will use the community level tool to help identify additional precautions based on the level of risk. Additionally, it provides, the community level tool provides a weekly cadence to follow trends, which is much like what we've already been doing locally. And lastly, it reduces confusion to move to one consistent tool versus maintaining two tools to assess community and individual risk. So in short, public health will be migrating to the community level tool this week going forward. In addition to shifting our monitoring of local trends to the community level tool, our COVID-19 command team has discussed and recommended that we move to once monthly community briefings beginning April 5th, with decreasing trends, community understanding of recommendations and precautions based on the risk, and that we are demobilizing mass COVID-19 operations and continuing to integrate those into our regular public health operations. It is time to also reduce the frequency of the briefings. Ultimately, we hope to transition to no standing briefings within 1 to 2 cycles, so about 1 to 2 months, but reserve the opportunity to provide more frequent briefings should the COVID-19 situation warrant or the board so requests it. Next up, I did want to give you a summary and a reminder for our community of the vaccine efforts and testing opportunities within our community. So not much has changed in the uptake of vaccine by age group in the last 2 weeks since I saw you all. Vaccines are still increasing, but at a slower pace than previously. In the past week, Buncombe County HHS saw a jump in vaccines administered thanks in part to our equity-focused community outreach, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Overall, 72% of our eligible population has received at least one dose, and almost 99,000 third or booster doses have been administered at this time. Third and booster doses continue to be the majority of the doses that Buncombe County HHS administers through our clinic. You all have heard me say many times that we have moved our COVID-19 vaccination clinic into our existing immunization clinic at the health department located at 40 Cox. That occurred on February 21st. The transition has been relatively smooth and working well. Individuals can visit us at the health department to receive the dose that they need, and COVID-19 vaccine is available by walk-in. Last week, we did partner with Healthier Together, YMCA, and the Mexican Consulate to provide vaccinations over the course of 3 days. This event resulted in almost 60 COVID-19 vaccinations being administered and over 30 flu vaccines being administered. So I want to thank all of our partners involved in the planning and implementation and execution of that event, who also provided lots of wraparound information while we were providing vaccine. And as a reminder to our neighbors who are not yet up to date on their vaccines, and with reports indicating from Europe and other places that they are beginning to see a rise in cases, I want to remind folks that if you are missing a dose or have not started your series, now's the time to do that. As you've heard me say before, and as our world sort of shifts into a more endemic approach to our response to COVID-19, it is likely that we will see waves of cases come. And again, just a reminder that as we proceed on this journey from pandemic to more of an endemic state, it doesn't mean that COVID has disappeared. It actually, the very nature of being endemic means it's with us all the time. So just a reminder to folks to stay up to date on your vaccines, and if you have not started your series, please do so. Community testing is still available in Buncombe. If you are having symptoms and have been exposed, you can visit the StarMed website to find a location and time to be tested. Currently, StarMed continues to provide testing at the Asheville Mall and at Harrah's Convention Center. They did discontinue their site at AB Tech on Sundays and Mondays due to low turnout, and that was effective this week. And there are many other testing providers in the community, and you can find them at the North Carolina DHHS Find My Testing Place website, which is listed. I did just want to take a few moments to talk briefly about the Test to Treat program, a new initiative at from the federal administration, and just provide an overview. So the Test to Treat program allows individuals who need to be tested at a site. If they are positive, they then are eligible for treatment and can receive an appropriate prescription from a qualified healthcare provider and have their prescription filled at that site. So it's essentially building a one-stop shop for folks who are positive for COVID-19 and may be eligible or meet criteria for treatment. In some cases, individuals who receive COVID-19 test results through at-home testing or other testing sites can also utilize the Test to Treat location to receive a prescription from a qualified healthcare provider and treatment on the spot if they're eligible. There are 77 retail pharmacy sites. So the federal administration started this program with their retail pharmacy program. And there are 77 retail pharmacy sites within North Carolina, and 3 are located in Buncombe County. They are listed on there. They are all CVS's. It is expected over the next few weeks that additional locations, including FQHCs and long-term care facilities, will be added to the program. By mid-March, we anticipate that a site locator, so one of those wayfinding sites, will be launched by the federal administration, and North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services has stated that they're also expecting to update their treatment locator to designate Test to Treat on their locator. So as people look at their treatment locator, it will designate spots as Test to Treat versus just having treatment. And in closing, here are a few things to remember. It's really important for everyone to evaluate their level of risk and consider additional precautions based on that risk that you have. Be aware of symptoms and exposure to those with COVID-19. If exposed or if symptoms present, consider getting tested at a community site, at a medical provider site, or an at-home test. If you are positive and or you are having symptoms, stay at home and wear a mask when you are around people. And if you are at high risk for severe illness, talk to your provider about treatment. I've put the website up there for the treatment locator that DHHS has, and consider getting the vaccine dose that you are missing today. So thank you so much for the time, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Stacy. Commissioners, any questions? All right, I don't think there are any at this time. Thanks so much. All right, the next item on our agenda is an update on the strategic plan, which we do quarterly. And Matt Baker and Burnett Waltz are here to help us out with this item. Thanks for being with us.
Apologies, we're just waiting for the presentation to come up.
No problem.
So clearly this is idiot-proof.
It's actually pretty hard. You're not alone in trying to figure out how to get that to work.
How do we advance it?
We're going to try to get some money in the budget this year to upgrade that
All right, so
device.
good afternoon, commissioners. My name is Burnett Walls, and I'm here today with my colleague, Matt Baker. We are both members of the Strategy and Innovation team and we're going to share with you all a high-level overview of the progress that the organization has been making towards the strategic plan and the accompanying initiatives. So during our time today, we're going to provide you guys with a high-level overview of the community focus areas with an understanding that in future meetings, a more in-depth deep dive into each focus area will take place. So with that in mind, I'd like to share with you all some context on the organization's strategy for aligning to and advancing the vision of the strategic plan. So at a high level, once the strategic plan was adopted, the county departmental leaders began the process of developing business plans. And the business plans contain key goals and initiatives that align to the 5 focus areas of the strategic plan. Subsequently, we've developed focus area work groups, and the work groups contain or are comprised of departmental leaders that have goals that align to that specific work group. And the objective of the work groups is to advance the vision of each of the focus areas. It's important to mention, too, just to let you guys know, that the results from the community survey are also helping to inform and guide the work groups as well, too. So in an effort to track performance and provide transparency to the community, a dashboard has been developed, and you can find that dashboard at buncombecounty.org, and it's under the strategic plan. The visual that you see reflected here is the landing page for that community dashboard, and by clicking on each of the focus areas, it allows the viewer to see some additional detail. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't call out that you can see there's only 4 focus areas represented currently. The foundational focus area is not reflected in the dashboard, and that's intentional due to the fact that the organization has prioritized the development of community focus area goals over those of internal or foundational goals. However, please know that we continue to work on those foundational goals, and you can expect to see them reflected in the dashboard in the future. So once again, real quick, the intent of today is to provide you all with an overview at the focus area level, and if additional detail or questions need to be answered that Matt and myself can't, we're happy to take those back to the work group team leads. And just for your information, those individuals are Jim Blanton for Educated and Capable, Jeremiah Leroy for Environmental and Energy Stewardship, Rachel Nygaard for Resident Wellbeing, and Tim Love for Vibrant Economy. Okay, so hang on a second here. Okay, so you'll see in the following slides that they have a very consistent format that reflect the community focus area and the goals that fall under those focus areas. The visuals represent performance of the departmental goals that align to those given focus areas. As an example, both of the goals you see on this slide, increase kindergarten readiness and improve college and career readiness, are green or on track, which indicates that the departmental goals aligned to them are meeting their most recent targets. It's important to keep that in mind, that this does not mean that they have met the goal or target for the entirety of the strategic plan, but rather it represents the most recently reported progress. Everybody got that? Everybody good? That's an important concept. Snapshot in time. So looking at getting into the goals, so looking at the increased kindergarten readiness goal, both the libraries and strategic partnerships, which align to increase kindergarten readiness, achieve the targets of their goals, which were associated with the Preschool Outreach Program, or POP, and the Early Childhood Education Fund. More specifically, they have been successful at providing learning materials and content, as well as program support to early childhood education classrooms. The other goal reflected here, improve college and career readiness, is representative of the number of students enrolled in the North Carolina Student Assistance Program, which provides them the opportunity to work with election services as well as gain exposure to a career in local government. Okay, so just a quick reminder, once again, the visuals represent the most recently reported results. Thus, given that the goals you see on this slide that are red, please know that there is plenty of time still remaining to get these back on track. So we've got a pretty long runway to reverse course on these two. They are red, like I said, for the most recently reported results. So looking at the expand and maintain cultural and recreational assets goal, there's been made progress towards increasing the number of county recreational assets. For example, there's been a new paddle boat fleet launched at Lake Julian. The first county dog park has been opened. There's ongoing development of greenways. And also under development is a park safety and master plan. In terms of the challenges that this goal, that the department's been facing with this goal, really the biggest one is around rising costs due to supply chain issues as well as land scarcity. Flipping gears, we're flipping to the increased access and public transportation, including public transit and paratransit services. The good news here with this one is that we are likely to see a double-digit year-over-year increase in ridership and mountain mobility. However, this one has been impacted, particularly over the course of the past 2 years, as a result of driver shortages due to the pandemic.
Is it all right if we have questions throughout the presentation?
Sure, go ahead, yeah.
So on the mountain mobility ridership increase, is that like a bump back from a decline during COVID, or is that like a real growth over sort of pre-COVID levels?
That's a great question. I don't know specifically what the target is, but I'm pretty sure that it is an increase over the COVID level. So we didn't go back and adjust targets for that. But we can take that as a takeaway to specifically answer.
Great.
Any questions before we move on? Okay, so looking at the reduced jail population and enhanced public safety goal, you can see this one is yellow. Some noteworthy progress that has been made is that the county, in partnership with community members and service providers, have implemented a violence interrupters program, which is currently operating in 2 neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted by violent crime. Additionally, the development of a community-led safety plan with the focus on reducing violent crime is on track to be completed by the end of this fiscal year. Shifting gears quickly and looking at challenges, you can see that the pandemic is called out for both of these goals as a challenge. Specific to reducing the jail population, the pandemic has significantly impacted the way in which the court system operates, creating sizable backlogs and longer case processing times. Quickly looking at the eliminate deaths as a result of substance abuse goal, both public health and social work departments have been able to provide valuable services to the community despite the significant headwinds of the pandemic. However, both departments have indicated that there have been challenges delivering programming due to COVID restrictions, and they've also indicated that they're seeing an increase in substance abuse as a coping mechanism as a result of the heightened stress levels due to the pandemic. Anybody have any questions before we pass the baton to my colleague? Okay.
So on environmental and energy stewardship, home weatherization is at nearly back to pre-pandemic levels. Actually, we're ahead of pace for 2022. And this is some of the progress we've made here has been in the new residential solar contract. That's actually 180, which is equivalent of 1.4 megawatts. And this includes 12 low-income installations and projects. However, there are some headwinds here. You'll hear this throughout. Supply chain issues are a concern. In fact, supply chain issues have delayed installation of solar projects for public facilities as a result of those. On preserving farmland and environmentally sensitive tracts, they've had a record-breaking 18 conservation easement projects during this reported period. for context, is typically 6. So that's very, very good. However, there are limitations on what they can do regarding the funding methodology that is used by the USDA and the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, where they parcel out a pot of money and you can only get so much of it. So there's a limitation there as far as how far they can move that needle. And vibrant economy. So these goals are on track for this reporting period for increasing the median household income to the North Carolina benchmark. We've been growing local businesses. That's resulted in a lot more good-paying jobs and expanding broadband. To point to a few expansions from System Logistics Corporation, Borg-Warner, will create 200-plus jobs with an average wage of $26 per hour and nearly $70 million in capital investment. With broadband, this county has committed to expanding unserved areas, including rural Buncombe County and the Housing Authority of Asheville. There are, again, challenges due to inflation, workforce issues, and supply chain issues, resulting in higher costs of living. And in broadband, we are limited and restricted by existing and changing North Carolina statutory requirements. For increasing total employment in the region's targeted industries, the One Buncombe Fund distributed its latest round of funding, $1.9 million in relief for small businesses, which is helping with the retainment of over 1,000 jobs. However, we're also investing in equitable job growth, $1.25 million allocated to the Mountain Community Capital Fund, which is a small business loan program that helps create jobs. In fact, 320 jobs, and there's also been $375,000 allocated to the Community Equity Fund to provide equity capital for local businesses for startups. There are challenges here as well, however. There are sector-specific workforce deficits in terms of skills, and some example sectors would include advanced manufacturing and healthcare. It's not limited to those, but those are two that we're finding some headwinds in skilled workforce. Growing land values are also a challenge, and land scarcity. It makes development of industrial locations more difficult, and it's increased the competition for the land for other uses. So those are some headwinds in that regard. And for implementing land use strategies that encourage affordable housing near transportation and jobs. So the Affordable Housing Committee will be talking about their goals that they set here shortly. And we can report that 108 affordable housing units were created during this reporting period. And those were a mix. Some were single-family homes. Some were through the home repair program, and others were tenant-based rental assistance. The problem, well, not really a problem, but one of the challenges with tracking progress of this particular goal is that project completion is sometimes long and falls outside the scope of a given reporting period, but might show up later. So this is one of those that may be a feast or famine kind of goal, and that's just the way it swings with that particular project. So one question you may have is, are we moving the needle? And in regards to these county goals that we've shown you, I think the results kind of speak for themselves. We've made strides in some areas, but we have some work to do in others. As far as macro trends are concerned, things like poverty and the ability to age in place, it's a little too soon to tell. Those tend to be lagging indicators, but whenever we do have that information available, we look forward to sharing it with you at a future update. And with that, we will happily take your questions.
All right, great job. Any questions from commissioners? I have just one question. I want to make sure I heard correctly.
Certainly.
The paddle boat project is on track.
It's on track.
All right. Love paddle boats. All right. Guys, thanks for the update. We appreciate it. Thanks for the great work with all the different teams working to advance these strategic goals. All right, commissioners, the next item on the agenda is the code enforcement team process, and Bob Haynes and Nate Pennington are here to help us out with this.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Hope everybody's doing well. Nathan Pennington here, planning director. We wanted to come to y'all to bring forward an update on code enforcement. This is a collaborative effort, and we'd like to introduce a project that's been in the works kind of in the background during the COVID time period. And today, I'm happy to tell you that we have permits and inspections, environmental health, solid waste, legal, the sheriff's office, air quality, and the fire marshal, all assembled here together. We're going to introduce you to a number of subject matter experts, and we hope that it brings a little bit more clarity in terms of when you open your email inbox and you receive concerns. And so we're going to walk you through, and we're going to let you ask a lot of questions. And then each department has 2 slides, and then we'll just kind of go from there. And before I forget, I want to go ahead and introduce to you formally Mr. Jeff Bird. You will come join me. Jeff is our zoning and code compliance officer. He's also a former police officer and has joined the planning team. If you just want to say hello.
Hello, you guys. I'm excited about being here, and I'm looking forward to just keep knocking things down as they come in, because we got a lot of complaints coming in.
So his nickname is the Closer. Okay, so we all know what these look like. Complaints can typically be broken down into 2 buckets, life safety versus aesthetics and nuisance. We all know that as more and more folks move here from across the country, there's a tendency sometimes to import your own expectations of where you might have come from. We also know that as the county continues to urbanize, that increasingly creates an urban and rural interface. So someone might move here and not appreciate the rooster crowing or the guns that are being fired out in our more rural areas. And then we move to some of the ones that are a lot more problematic. Someone has built a home without permits. Yes, that happens. Probably more so than you think. Dealt with a lot of, we'll talk about what COVID's done here in just a second, but we've dealt with some pretty egregious violations over the past few years. Lots of floodplain violations, environmental health, including the pumping of raw sewage on the ground, burning of trash and debris. The most problematic in that case is household trash, also mattresses and tires, and Ashley can speak to that here in just a moment. So it's kind of all over the place. You never know what you're going to get. So the way this is broken down for the county is that in that code of ordinances, and that is an official picture of the Buncombe County Code and Ordinances in front of my door, is that it's broken down by components. So for instance, animal control is the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. Buildings and building regulations, that's permits and inspections. Little known is the fact that we have adult establishment regulations. The planning department actually does a yearly inspection of our 2 establishments in this county. There's a pawnbroker's provision that the sheriff's office has to look at. We know air quality, the junkyards, noise, erosion control, junk vehicles, stormwater. Environmental health, we have what's called delegated agencies. So environmental health is delegated by the state of North Carolina to issue permits for things like wells and septic permits, but they do a lot more than just that. And Jessica can speak to that. The fire marshal is here. The fire marshal can tell you about some of the inspections that they do as it relates to access and commercial buildings. We do a lot in planning, so those are just sort of broken up all throughout. And then solid waste. We get a lot of complaints as it relates to, right now there's just a lot of litter. There's a lot of litter not only here but across the country. Just about everywhere you go, you're going to see an increase in litter. So we talked about the pandemic and what that did. It absolutely exacerbated the situation, and here's why. At the very beginning, we were all sent home to work, largely. And what that did was it gave people an opportunity that were away 8 hours of the day to say, hey, what's my neighbor doing over there? What's all this noise? I don't necessarily like this. I'm going to call somebody. So we saw an absolute increase in complaint cases and a very large backlog. There's been a backlog and sometimes in the hundreds, especially in planning and solid waste. One of the things that's absolutely key that we do is public education. What the county can do, what the county cannot do. Let me give you an example. So for instance, we've got a lot of people that have been working on projects all through the pandemic. It was one of those things, you had to have something to keep you going. Well, sometimes permits didn't get pulled. So, there might have been an instance where a farmer wanted to fix a crook in a river. Yeah, that's a big deal. But the way that we partner together and work on these things is I call Jennifer Harrison from Soil and Water and I say, hey, can y'all come out with me and help explain why you don't want to do that or why you want to do that the correct way? So in a minute, we're going to describe how we all came together as a team. So what we also saw was an increase in the complexity. We might go out to a site to find severe hoarding, environmental health violations, including maybe wastewater on the ground, tires full of water that then allow mosquitoes to breed, solid waste, junk vehicles, things of that nature. Quiz question. What do we often see an increase of during hard financial times? Hoarding, junk vehicles. Price of metals go up. People want to bring those in. They need to make a little money. So you always tend to see things like this come sort of cyclical at times. We've also seen a lot of social issues crop up. So that's why I put in there poverty, substance abuse, homelessness. We've worked closely, and maybe at some other future briefing we can talk about the community paramedics and the role that they play. We've tried to develop resource cards, especially when there's an instance of somebody might be losing their home or something to that effect, or someone's home burns down. I mean, it can run the gamut. So that situational awareness, issues related to neighbor versus neighbor, also has increased litigation. Legal will describe later in this presentation a couple of things for us to keep in mind. And then again, we talked about urbanization. So we created a code enforcement team to handle these multidisciplinary issues that involve multiple departments. It allowed for silo deconstruction. It allowed for us to sit down at a table and talk about the issues together and really come up with a streamlined approach of how we might start chipping away at some of these really complex issues. We all know that if someone's down on their luck, they might have a roof that has a hole in it, and that starts to create a snowball effect. So our strategy here is to kind of jump in and assist where possible. You got a leaky roof? Hey, we got an affordable housing services program. You got this issue? Hey, we have this resource available to you. The idea is that we would meet regularly. We would triage cases. We would basically tell you all that we are your support network, and that's why you're going to be introduced to all your subject matter experts. And then later on, we're going to tell you, give you some additional tools. The other thing, too, is that we work with a lot of outside agencies. So all those acronyms stand for the Department of Environmental Quality, Army Corps of Engineers, North Carolina Department of Transportation, the Metropolitan Sewerage District, and many more. And the idea, too, is there's nothing to keep us from being creative. So we're going to continue to come up with innovative solutions to chip away, again, at some of these issues. So at the top left corner is going to be each discipline that you're going to see today. So for example, there's going to be a couple pictures in here for planning. Tropical Storm Fred created a lot of things that we had to clean up. It also created a number of tricky flood permitting issues. This building in particular here, unfortunately, was constructed near a floodway without proper permits. That's a failed stormwater pond. This is an erosion control violation, and this is an example of where you would see multiple disciplinary code enforcement issues when you look at the picture of the vehicles, the mattresses. So really, it just runs the gamut of what you might see. From a planning perspective, always voluntary compliance is our best strategy. The way that the process works in terms of code enforcement issues is that we always give folks, hey, courtesy call, we got this going on, we got this complaint, how can we get you to mitigate this strategy? If for whatever reason we can't get there, we issue a notice of violation, and almost every case is unique, although some are similar. So you might have a junk vehicle on one lot that might be the same as another, but oftentimes that's not the case across the county, just like no two lots are created equally. There's an appeal process associated with various boards, depending on how the ordinance is structured and written, and legal remedies will be discussed later in the presentation. That being said, we're going to move through to the various disciplines, permits, and inspections first. And at the end, there's plenty of time for questions.
Good afternoon, Bob Haynes, Permits and Inspections. Before we get started, just like to say that we are in the process of creating a master complaint case, and we have one person to contact, and Jason Rogers is that contact from our department. He's Assistant Director. So if any of y'all get a complaint and you wish to move it on, Jason will do that. He'll do the boots on the ground, find out who all needs involved, and spread out from there. And anybody needing information about that can just contact Jason. And so, continuing on, this structure here was from a complaint that some of y'all are familiar with. I think it was on Dix Creek. We got this one in. Jason made a site visit along with solid waste and planning. I think Jeff went with him on that one. So it was an elderly individual on there, and we actually reached out to Stoney to get some adult aid for the individual there. I'm not sure exactly where we're all in the whole process of everything on that one. But we go out and we see many different things. You've got to get your boots on the ground to find out what the issue is. Situations like this, he had structural issues, litter, junk cars, all sorts of stuff. Once we go through all that process and we make our determination, if it's structurally sound, we have general statutes that we have to follow to determine if we can condemn the building, have them secure the building from vagrancy or stuff like that. So we have to follow all those processes, and those normally, the minimum, we have a 14-day period for them to make the corrections to get it secure. If they don't, then we have to have a hearing within 10 days of that, and then we give them 60 days to comply with our final order. If they still do not comply, then we have to come back and go through the whole condemnation process, putting it out to bid and stuff like that. So once we go through that, then we put a lien on their property. We try to get them to voluntarily remove it so it don't have to go through all that paperwork. There's the timeline. We typically, once we receive the complaint, we typically get out there within 2 days maximum to see what all is involved and who else we need to notify. Sometimes we take those other departments with us if we can get them quick enough. And again, on the time frame, if legal needs to get involved and everything like that, we do that. But typically, within a couple of days, we got boots on the ground, finding out what all needs done. And then everybody's processes will start from there. Ours is not as bad as some of the other departments for processes, just because ours deals more with life safety, and it's a more quicker turnaround time. Y'all have any questions for me on my end? All righty, thank y'all.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kevin Tipton. I'm your interim fire marshal at this time. Jerry retired a few weeks back. Most of you know that. Minimum fire prevention code standards. They apply to all commercial and multifamily structures in Buncombe County. And multifamily is classified as 3 or more families in a building. The fire code specifically does not apply to 1 and 2 family buildings. This includes assemblies and event centers, including churches, religious assemblies. All licensed agricultural operations are exempt from the fire code. We have fought that for many years at a state legislative level because we have farmers that are turning their barns into event centers. They're exempt from the fire code. They can sell alcohol without ever having an inspection. They can put 1,000 people in this barn, and there's nothing that we can do with that one. But there are over 5,000 commercial structures in Buncombe County. That does not include the city of Asheville, the town of Montreat, the town of Black Mountain, or the town of Weaverville. And a majority of these are inspected on a semi-annual basis every 2 years. And that depends on the size, the complexity, and the type of occupancy in that building. The minimum standards vary greatly. You can go to your local bank. They're required to have a fire extinguisher of a proper size, exit lighting, and emergency lighting in case the power goes out. And you can go all the way to the other end of the gamut. The biggest project I've ever taken on, of course, is Pratt & Whitney. There will be 33 miles of sprinkler piping in that building, fire protection alone, hundreds of miles of fire alarm wiring alone. First inspection out there, I inspected 3.4 miles of sprinkler piping, and that covered 13% of the building. So that is what we do as far as fire codes. When we get into the urban and rural areas, I've got to figure out how to work your that thing got me too, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for that. A lot of what we're seeing now is urban invading rural. And this has been played out with wildfires. Commercial multifamily developments are crossing into rural areas. Then you get into emergency services access issues. I'd be remiss if I didn't stop there and thank Nate Pennington and his staff. This code enforcement team has been the greatest asset I've had for access issues. Commercial access is a whole much easier to negotiate. The fire code sets out the standards. You have to meet the fire code. There's not a lot of wiggle room there, but you get into single family access issues, these cause me quite a bit of a large problem. Their natural disasters can cut off access to entire communities. We saw this during Fred. And unfortunately, a lot of the communities that gets cut off are the most underserved communities of our county. Far west, Candler, very rural areas tend to get cut off. And with access single-family homes and no enforcement, I kind of put this at the bottom. Do we solve this issue with ordinance, at an ordinance level, with working with planning? Or do we solve the access issues at the building permit level? What is already built is built. I know we can't go back. I received a complaint yesterday from a citizen. She was an epileptic. She called EMS quite frequently. She was concerned about the EMS being able to get to her home. I made time. I went out there yesterday afternoon, met with her, assessed the driveway. But we don't have a whole lot of enforcement we can do about it. But to put your mind at ease, EMS can get to her home. It's not ideal, but they can get there. So those are the issues that Nate and his code enforcement team have helped me the most with, are these rural access areas. Any questions for me?
I don't think so at this time. Thank you.
Again, I'll be your contact for citizen complaints. Please reach out to me anytime, and any life safety complaint is investigated immediately, no matter what one of us has to stop doing to handle that.
Solid waste?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Kim Spillers, and I'm the Environmental Control Enforcement Specialist. And I deal with General Statutes 6228 and 6229. On this slide, you'll see that the duties of the responsibility of the property owners is to maintain their property in a clean, sanitary, and orderly appearance, no open dumps, and to remove and properly dispose of solid waste. To my right, Nate. Too far. On that first slide, I'm sorry, that was a before picture of a property we've been working with for a little over a year. I can go back. That's the before. This is the after. We investigate complaints. We try to investigate those within 2 to 5 days of receiving those complaints. If safe, if we deem it safe, looks safe, we will attempt to contact the property owner or the tenant at that point and give them a verbal warning. After that, we inspect after 15 days. If no improvement, then I will issue a formal NOV through the mail. We'll re-inspect again after 15 days, hoping they've improved some. If not, then I will issue a final NOV through the mail. If after another 15 days, basically 45 days total, nothing has become of it, then we could go to 6229, which we can offer for the county to clean it up, and they reimburse the county for the cost of that. Next slide. The first line is just kind of a real quick process through that.
I have a question.
Sure.
If you take that final step, how does the county compel compliance with the payment requirement to reimburse the county?
On 6229, we have in the ordinance, it says that we can clean it up and ask that they reimburse the county for that. Brandon Freeman came up with a form that we have them sign that gives us rights to be there, and ask them or tells them they sign to pay back the county. We have actually instated that on that last slide, and she is paying the county back for that, for getting that cleaned up. If not, then we will go against Brandon, debt set off.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Debt set-off is a process that is open to North Carolina local governments, and it can collect taxes that come to people who have been enrolled in that program or lottery winnings. There is also an option to attach liens to real property. My understanding after talking with county officials is that is a less desired approach, but it is an option for the county in these code enforcement cases and in most of the ordinance, but the debt set-off program is what is typically used. And to my knowledge, I don't think we've sent anything through code enforcement to debt set-off, but it is an option. I think we've had some luck with compliance.
Okay, the next line kind of talks about the litter, roadside trash. We partner with DOT, Green Marks, the railroad system to clean those up. Basically, it's a collaborative effort between everybody that owns property in or near the roadways. I also try to encourage people to adopt a highway through the NCDOT to help with that effort. I have some enforcement options. We can provide a dumpster, the county cleanup, and then the legal action. The dumpster works out real well. If we can provide them with a dumpster, they'll usually comply and get everything cleaned up for the most part. I've had real good luck with that. Any questions?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Silver. I'm the Environmental Health Program Administrator, and I'm really happy to be before you today. Environmental health is a core function of the public health for North Carolina. We do get receive our authority to work in our field from the state. We are part of the North Carolina Division of Health and Human Services Environmental Health Section, and with Buncombe County's HHS Public Health Section. And in North Carolina, all buildings that have access to water or plumbing fixtures is required to have an on-site wastewater septic system or some type of public sewage system. And the whole goal of this, as you can see by the bullet there, is to avoid contamination of groundwater supplies by making sure that waste is adequately and properly disposed of. So what we normally see in environmental health complaints as it relates to the code enforcement team are are complaints or failures around septic systems. And we view septic system failures in three different ways. Either sewage is surfacing on the ground, that's considered a failure. Sewage could also be backing up into someone's house, that's a failure. And the third and final failure is if sewage is discharging or making it to some type of groundwater supply or a surface water, like a pond or a creek. Our complaint process, because we do receive our delegation through the state, we have to follow the state's guidelines for how we follow up on complaints. We receive an initial complaint, and at that initial site visit, once the complaint is verified, right, we see sewage surfacing on the ground, we will issue a notice of violation at that very first site visit. And the main reason for that notice of violation going out at that first site visit is that the state requires us to issue 3 NOVs. And that could take us up to 90 days to get through that process. And as you can imagine, during that 90-day time frame, if no work has been done, if it's a neighbor complaining on a neighbor, then people tend to get really impatient with the process and they don't understand it. So that's where public education comes into play. Like, we really have to say, our hands are tied, this is what we can do, but we will get through this process. So once the notice, we've reached our max on the notices of violation that we have issued, we can pursue legal options. And I have those listed. One of the, all of these legal options, the health director can work, we take the issue to the health director, and the health director can help us make a recommendation to our county attorney, either to go with an injunction, which says basically you have to rid your property of the public health violation. Or we could do an abatement that says you have to fix the problem. And what normally happens, or what we normally see, is issuing an imminent hazard that says that if this is not fixed, then it could cause environmental harm to the environment or harm to the general public's health. There's also an option for pursuing a misdemeanor. And that's it. Are there any questions for the environmental health portion?
Are there any, if you get a notice of violation, the first one, are there any financial consequences that go with that? Or what does it mean to get a notice of violation, I guess is what I'm wondering.
That's a great question. We do not have the ability to impose fines. Usually what happens, we issue a notice of violation. The property owner will need to apply for a permit, could need to apply for a repair permit. And once that repair permit is issued, the person would need to make whatever, install either a new tank or replace a drain line or a distribution box. The first diagram, the first picture, the first slide shows an example of just like a picture of a septic system, just to give you an idea. Septic systems are designed to work by collecting the sewage, dispersing the sewage, and then treating the water through absorption into the ground. And a failure can occur at any point in the system, right? So like if a tank lid is cracked because someone drove over the septic tank, and that does happen. Or I talked to someone last week who built a concrete pad on their drain field and caused backup into their house.
So there's no penalty after the first one, and then you can issue another one in 30 days? It's 90 days total, so you have to wait 30 days to issue the second one?
30 days is the state gives us 3 options. We can either do 30 days, 15 days, or 7 days, depending on the severity of the situation.
Okay.
So it's up to the inspector's discretion about what they actually see on the site.
Okay. So it could be up to 90 days, or it could go faster if it meets the criteria for, hey, we got to move on this quicker. 'cause it's-
Yes, and what I will say about that, once we get into the realm of following the court system, the legal system, then we're at the mercy of the scheduling at the court level.
And you have to issue 3 total notices of violation before, like if regardless of how long you've taken on to do the second one, is there any financial consequence after you get the second notice of violation, or still nothing?
Still nothing. We do not have fining authority from the state.
Okay.
Mhm.
But then once you've issued 3 notices of violation, then what happens after that again?
Then we'll take it to the health director and say, hey, for instance, this property owner is delaying or not installing a repair system, or they don't have a septic system at all and they're just disposing of their waste on the ground.
Mhm.
What would you like for us to do? At that point, before that point, we've gotten county legal involved to say, hey, this may be coming your way. And after going either the injunction route or the abatement route, we usually get compliance. And it is through, in my experience here, we've successfully been able to, the time that we had to go to court, we've been able to have a lien placed on the property to have the issue abated.
Okay. But we never issue fines. Like, that's not one of the tools. It's
No.
Like, we can file a legal action and try to compel compliance through those means, but it doesn't ever involve like $100 a day or something like that. That's not part of what you can do.
No, that's not something that we have the authority to do.
Okay.
Great questions.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Ashley Featherstone with Asheville Buncombe Air Quality, and I have Kevin Lance with me. He implements our open burning program, among other things. So I just wanted to run through our open burning regulations and the most frequent complaints that we receive, see if you have any questions. Here in North Carolina, open burning regulations are part of the air pollution code that is implemented by the state and 3 local agencies. And burning is allowed under certain circumstances. So it is legal to burn naturally occurring vegetation that grows on your property, and that is only between the hours of 8 and 6, and only if you live in an area where there is no public pickup for yard waste. There are other instances where it's allowed for a variety of things like campfires, agricultural burning, things of that nature. Also, land clearing open burning, that is also allowed, but it has a separate section of our regulations. Land clearing open burning is really big fires that are associated with development of residential, commercial, right-of-way maintenance, things of that nature. These are really large open burning operations, and there is a setback requirement. That's the main requirement there. You have to be at least 500 feet from the nearest occupied dwelling. And unfortunately, that used to be 1,000 feet, and that got changed by the legislature back in 2011. So we've had a lot more complaints from residents about land clearing operations. We used to require permits for those, but we don't anymore, but they still have to meet the requirements. So a lot of times we get complaints from citizens, residents. We go out and find that the developer is burning within that 500 feet. And sometimes they're not, but we still, they still have impacts. So a big part of what we do is just going out to determine whether or not something is meeting the requirements or not. So we're a little bit, we are somewhat limited in what we can do there. So the next slide is on illegal open burning. So it's always illegal to burn any kind of trash or synthetic building materials. EPA has a lot of good information on their website. Just one family burning household garbage in a barrel actually puts out more toxic air pollution than a hazardous or a municipal waste incinerator serving many households. And that's because there's no controls on it. So we do get that is definitely the most common complaint that we get, and I have to say, I was surprised when I came to work here 20 years ago that people still burn their trash, but they actually do, and we get about 80 or so complaints a year right now. It's actually been up from the pandemic, like Nate said, and we're hearing from the other air pollution agencies, and they're seeing more complaints as well. We do have the ability to issue civil penalties. $25,000 is the maximum penalty that any state or local air pollution agency in North Carolina can issue, but of course that's very rare. That is the maximum. We also have the ability to have criminal enforcement actions as well, but the majority of the time it's civil penalties that we issue. And we are beginning to use the debt set-off process for those. All of these penalties go to the school board in Buncombe County, and we are allowed to charge a small administrative fee as part of that process. We do work closely with the fire departments, and they actually respond to a lot of these complaints and handle them. They sometimes call us in because if they go out to someplace multiple times and tell people, you know, what they're burning is illegally, and they get called back, they know that we have the ability to issue the civil penalties, so lots of times they'll call us in if the residents aren't calling us directly, so that we can try to get the problem corrected. And one of the things we do, we really just want people to be in compliance. Some of the places where we find the illegal burning, residents don't have trash pickup. So as an incentive, we will say, hey, we can issue a fine, but if you will get trash pickup or show us that you're going to do that, then we will waive it the first time. So that's been helpful in a lot of situations. And we really appreciate working with Nate and his team with the code enforcement. It's been very beneficial for us to talk through these cases with the other departments. And any questions?
And how do you, I guess, and I'm kind of just curious about the different departments, how do you make the decision around, like, we need to do a penalty here, or let's, give them a pass on this case? Like, what's the criteria you use? And do you sometimes, do you sometimes do a penalty on the first occasion?
Yes, we do. We have a civil penalty policy, and we fall under the North Carolina general statutes as far as the penalties, and so they're not set, but we do also correspond with, like, say, Department of Environmental Quality, and look at their fines and use those as a little bit of a guideline. But it is pretty prescriptive. We have it spelled out whether it's a resident versus a business, how big the burn pile is, what it contained, was it illegal materials, was it one pickup truck full versus was it, two pickup trucks or very large areas. So sometimes we don't issue a fine on the first time, but the ones that are more egregious than we typically do.
Okay. All right, thanks, Ashley.
Thanks.
Okay, all right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm Jim Robinson. I'm the supervisor of the Animal Services Division at the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office. It's kind of hard to squeeze what we do on the few slides here. In addition to animal cruelty investigations, one of our most important functions is the rabies protocols. And we do that in a partnership with the Disease Control Division of the Health Department. So we document somewhere around 500 potential rabies exposures every year in Buncombe County. We document these, we forward that to the Health Department so that they can implement their protocols. Then we also administer quarantines and rabies testing in some cases, and try to follow up with the animal owners involved, make sure we've got vaccinations updated if they're not in compliance. But that is one of our most important functions there, with rabies being 100% fatal and all. Dangerous animals, primarily dangerous dogs, we get a lot of complaints about that. And, you know, a lot of animal bites, but not every time the neighbor's Boston Terrier runs out and tags a mailman, that's not a dangerous dog, you know, but we do have quite a few animals that have been allowed to run at large in the neighborhood and have genuinely endangered the public at large, or someone within that household if they've injured them seriously. We have to deal with those things with a lot of times by declaring the animals potentially dangerous and putting in place preventive measures, orders that require confinement and other measures to prevent there being further incidents. And when we can, we try to implement preventive measures prior to someone being injured. If we've got an animal that's displaying dangerous conduct, we try to get those in place. We don't want to wait for someone to be hurt. The stray feral community cat population of Buncombe County, it's something that we hear quite a lot about, especially in trailer parks. We've got a lot of these cats that multiply and populate these areas. And several years ago, Buncombe County implemented a program. Jim Holland, the assistant county manager at that time, and Sheriff Duncan and the administration of the Asheville Humane Society put in place a plan as a trap, neuter, and return program to try to trap these cats in these areas, spay and neuter them, vaccinate them for rabies, and return them to where they were found. And there's a whole big, long, drawn-out explanation for why they feel that's effective, but at the end of the day, I agree with them. It's you can trap cats all day long until you're blue in the face. You're never going to get them all. And if you're leaving them out there unaltered, they're going to repopulate. And so far, I was really amazed. I figured that we would have got an enormous outcry from the community about that. But, you know, we do have some grumbling about it. We don't want them trapped and brought back. We want them gone. But by and large, people have been very receptive to this, and I think it's doing a lot of good. The organizations that do the trap, neuter, and return are private organizations, Brother Wolf, Friends to Ferals, Sister Kittens, and they're doing that at their expense too, by the way. And the involvement of animal services with cats has been limited to picking up cats that are needed for quarantine, bite quarantines, or they're sick or injured. Picking up owner-surrendered animals. The shelter here a couple of years ago had to put in place what's called a managed intake system because they were, you know, up until then, people could just bring their animal in and surrender it, turn around, walk off, and leave. And I'm actually still kind of in favor of that, but you know, because I always fear that animals are going to be left somewhere where they're not wanted if the people don't have the ability to surrender them. But they seem to be doing pretty well. What they're doing is when someone comes in, they tell them, okay, we've got to schedule an appointment for you to come in. Here's some resources that you can check in the meantime that might help you, allow you to keep your animal. And then if that hasn't helped them by the time their appointment comes in, they go ahead and surrender the animal as planned. This keeps the shelter from having to euthanize animals to make room for the other animals that are surrendered. And now we have the ability to bypass that process. You know, we run into a situation where the animals may be not being well cared for, or it's a nuisance, or it's dangerous, or if you have the owners are being evicted, they're living in their car, domestic violence, something of that nature, we can go ahead and bypass that process and admit those animals to the shelter. But that's what we're doing with the owner-surrendered animals. And this button's not working.
It advanced.
Did it?
Yep.
Oh, well, how about that? Okay, so animal noise issues. These are the bane of my existence, folks. I hate them. You know, we've got one problem here with our animal noise issues. They're covered in both the noise ordinance and the animal control ordinance. And in the noise ordinance, there's an exception for noisy animals, farm animals, or granted immunity from this. Whereas they're not given an exemption in the animal control ordinance. Now, we defer to that exemption when we're dealing with that, because I believe if you ever found yourself in a courtroom battling over this, it's probably going to be in the realm of being unconstitutionally vague. And so we try to err on that side. One of the problems here is there's no definition of a farm animal. There's no definition of a farming operation. It doesn't say you have to have a farming operation, just farm animal. So what is a farm animal? It doesn't define that. I'd say a rooster is a farm animal, and there's one of our big problems. So in any event, when we have an animal noise complaint, there's a process that was implemented many, many moons ago where, we will respond, we'll investigate, we'll make contact with the offending animal owner, say, look, you've got some complaints about the noise of your animal, and here's your obligations under the ordinance, is what you're supposed to do. But when it continues to be a problem, as it inevitably does, then the next step, if we can cite them, we can issue civil citation for it. If we observe that and we can cite them, we'll certainly do it. But 99 times out of 100, we show up, we don't observe the problem. We don't hear the dog barking that's keeping them awake at night. Our patrol officers will respond after hours, and sometimes they do. But more often than not, we're not observing the problem firsthand. We'll tell the complainants, look, if you make recordings, audio, video recordings, we can come out and issue civil citations. And, once we issue a civil citation, that's pretty much going to be the extent of our involvement. After that, the next step of this process is they fill out a bark log, they contact mediation, attempt to mediate with the offending animal owner, and if that fails, then we give them a letter, take to the magistrate's office to draw a summons for their neighbor for violating the barking ordinance. It is a cumbersome process. It truly is. And even once a charge is issued, it could be on the docket for a year or two before it finally goes to court. And at the end of all of that, it's a Class 3 misdemeanor. There's nothing in any ordinance or the state laws that gives us the authority to go seize these animals and take them away. The court can order certain things, a criminal court, but with it being a Class 3 misdemeanor, in order for the court to order you to do one thing or another with your animals, you have to have a very bad criminal record. The court has to be in a position to give you an active jail sentence and place you on probation and make this order a condition of that probation. And even then, that order is only going to be good for the length of the probation. So probably the more direct route here is for the offended party to pursue this through a civil action. The civil court does have the authority to place an injunction against the offending animal owner. Of course, that costs money for the people that are being affected by this. So
Could the county ordinance be amended to make it more practically enforceable in a meaningful way?
I honestly don't think so. I mean, that's something you probably have to ask Mr. Freeman and Mr. Euler. But as far as being able to take these animals away,
I'm not necessarily thinking of that remedy, but again, like a financial consequence or something like that. You speed, you get a speeding ticket. It costs money. It's a deterrent. I mean, is there a way to have an equivalent process in place for violation of noise ordinance?
well, we do have the civil fines. We certainly have the civil fines, but that's kind of like saying stop, or I'll tell you stop again. Because if they don't pay, we do have the debt set-off program that's been mentioned here, but a lot of the people you're dealing with, they don't get tax refunds. They don't win the lottery, so you're not going to collect that money from them. So you can write those tickets until you're blue in the face, and you're probably killing more trees than you are anything, just quite honestly. But we we do the best that we can with this. We do walk them through the process, and, you know, if it makes it to the stage that they go to the court, I think a lot of the offending animal owners, it is an inconvenience to them to have to go to court. And maybe that does get their attention, but it's a lot of work for the aggrieved parties to get it there in the first place. It's
It doesn't sound like a very good system for achieving compliance, and it sounds like, I mean, it's a tough issue inherently. I mean, I'm not,
Oh,
saying
yeah.
you guys aren't doing the best you can with it, but it doesn't sound like a great process for
It's
achieving
not.
that result.
It's not. It's terribly cumbersome. And at the end of the day, that it doesn't necessarily produce much in the way of results.
Right.
So there we are with that. And then the last issue I've got here is the animal odor and waste runoff issues. We don't get a lot of these complaints. And as someone had mentioned here earlier about people bringing their expectations with them when they move here, you know, they move into next to a farm and then they complain about the smell of the cows or the pigs and stuff like that. You know, it's a very subjective thing. And I can't think of a single situation where I've walked in and said, oh my Lord, that is terrible. I've got to issue a citation against these folks. You know, more often than not, if I got someone that insists that it's a problem with them, I'll say, look, meet me at the magistrate's office and I will explain to the magistrate that, you know, this is an offense and they can't issue the summons, and they're going to listen to what you got to say and decide whether or not to issue a charge on your behalf. I don't know that I've ever seen that happen once. Some people will complain about runoff of the animal waste. Well, you know, unless I see animal waste that's washed off onto their property, not much I can do about that. If I get something like that, a lot of times I will talk to the health department, to their wastewater runoff folks, and see if they've got any kind of solutions for that problem. But that's about all I've got. What kind of questions do you folks have for me?
Any other questions? All right, I don't think there's any more right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
All right, we have legal, and then I'll pop back up here. We'll answer any remaining questions and bring some closure to some of the themes that have been brought up here today.
All right, so you've heard from a lot of folks here who are walking code books in their field of expertise. Legal gets to work in a support function with these groups and help them try to work through some of their more difficult cases. And what legal support looks like depends on the department and what they're facing. Just to circle back a little bit on the animal issues, I think the Sergeant Robinson started that off appropriately by saying that it is a difficult issue. And I'm not sure I know of any county who has an ordinance that addresses it in a way that makes everyone happy. A lot of that process, the log of barking and things like that were developed at the court process. So that's not really a county function. That's something that the courts have required people to do because there are a lot of neighbors who do not like the way their animals next door make noise. It can be a really thorny issue, but we're happy to look into any improvements that we might be able to make. So when legal works with these departments, I think that we keep a few things in mind. Our biggest recommendation is to prioritize these cases. A lot of times, the cases that make it in front of these departments and the ones that get the most complaints are not the life safety issues, but are more aesthetic issues or and that's not always, but a lot of times it is. And that's a really tough balance for these departments to make. The other issue we run into is the high demand versus the capabilities. Our legal resources are not infinite, and the courts do get pretty clogged up with other matters. It's not really a quick process when things do go to court. We've had a lot of success with creative solutions, working with people, meeting them where they are, and finding a solution that everyone can live with. It's usually not fast, but we do try to work with folks. Any questions?
I don't see any right now. Thanks, Brandon.
So sort of want to bring some closure here to some of the things that you've heard today. One of the key themes is it's always good to go back and revisit your ordinances. That's what a comprehensive planning process is. A lot of what you've seen today with the Code of Ordinances, these were brought about based on community input back in the 90s. It's definitely time to revisit. You know, we're a changing and dynamic community. You might have situations where you have a $750,000 house going in next door to a person of lesser means out in the county, and the expectation is that their lifestyle might be different from the person next door. And these are just some of the things we're going to have to work through. The joke in planning sometimes, if two parties walk away with half, then you've fully done your job, meaning we're not going to make people happy. That's not our job. Our job is to do what the ordinances say, and sometimes that doesn't always equate to a happy situation. The subject matter experts today are your best tool, and we readily encourage you all, when you receive complaints, to reach out and let us jump in and handle the matter. And then oftentimes what you'll see us do is respond back with, hey, we took a look at the situation, here's what we found, here's what we can offer in terms of mitigating it or bringing closure to a situation. You met Jason Rogers, he's our primary staff contact. When you run into the ones that are multidisciplinary, it's appropriate to loop him in. If it's something like you're very sure it's a setback issue or a building code issue, then you have met the folks today, and what I can do is also follow behind and give you a list of everybody who is in attendance, and then provide that in an email so that you have that as well. And then what you've also heard today are some inconsistencies in that ordinances don't always communicate with each other. This is our time through the comprehensive planning process to hear from the community, and then follow behind that with a series of text amendments to sort of clean up. And there will also be, of course, listening sessions. We're getting ready to enter the phase of the comprehensive plan where we're getting back to good old-fashioned in-person meetings. We are super excited about that, but there's going to be a lot of times where you're going to see disagreement. Now, how do we get to compromise? And that's what I would offer you all today, and I hope this presentation has been helpful. And what additional questions can we answer for you all while we're all assembled today?
I just want to say thank you. This was very helpful to hear what each of you focus on. And thank you for saying that you'll follow up with us with that information. So, and is the best way to email everybody? Is that the preferred way, Nate?
Yes, that works great.
Okay, thank you.
I guess just, each of these issues is different, right, of course, in the circumstances, and some things are just black and white. Other situations are probably more ambiguous, right, or harder to observe and things like that. I guess just like as a high-level question, though, thinking about it organizationally, this question of, we say, like, our goal is really, of course, to have compliance, get people in compliance, mediate where we can, all those kind of things. I mean, that all is very appealing in a lot of ways, but I mean, I'm sure you're also aware of like the idea of like sometimes people think it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, right? So if we're always kind of going with that frame of mind in first, I mean, do we risk people kind of thinking along those lines too often? Like the county's not really going to do anything, just do what you want. If you get caught, they're not really going to do anything. I mean, what are your thoughts about, kind of trying to take that cooperative approach, but also we want people to, not knowingly violate our public ordinances too, right? So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's like re-entering a space capsule back into the Earth's atmosphere. If you do it too narrow, you'll skip off. If you have to do it right. It's like walking the edge of paper. You'd be surprised how many times you pick up the phone and say, hey, did you know you did this? Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I will get this cleaned up immediately. Or then you could very well be lied to. But what's surprising is you never know what you're going to get, and you can never go into it with any preconceived notions. What I think we need to do is go through this comprehensive planning processes, identify the ordinances we would like to see some revisions to, and come together on some strategies. Now, one thing that was brought up today is the state delegated authorities. So these are the erosion control. I can give you an instance the other day where I ran into a situation that was so egregious, we issued a $5,000 fine. No questions asked, it was paid. But you heard the challenges associated with environmental health. I think this is where we innovate. But I do think we do need to revisit all of the processes associated with every ordinance that we administer and make sure that it's right-sized for today's conditions. We do know that the conditions in the 90s were not the same as we're seeing now. So this is our opportunity to do that.
All right. Nate and everybody, appreciate all the presentations. Great job. Really informative. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioners, we do have a few minutes left over, so if it's okay, I would, love to just kind of walk through. We only have 4 slides on the affordable housing presentation, so just to kind of quickly preview that before our meeting at 5. So if we could put that up. Lamar, do you have that? Or does somebody have that? Do we? It's online now. Okay. Okay, great. Great. All right. So it's the website's been updated too. All right. Well, let's just kind of walk through this real quickly and just see if there's any questions, but just to kind of preview some of the numbers. This is very similar to what we went through. I guess it was about maybe a little over a month ago, maybe. But there have been a few tweaks to some of it. It's still very consistent with the general direction that we discussed then, but a few more specifics and a couple of tweaks. So just to walk through this, so these are the recommendations coming out of our Affordable Housing Subcommittee that we'd like to ask the Commission to consider. And if the Commission is comfortable, we could be prepared to go ahead and endorse these goals this evening. So the high-level goals that we have been focused on, and there are other goals that we're still working on. So, but we felt like these are some of the really big goals that we think we need to be focused on, and we wanted to go ahead and bring these forward since we feel like they're ready. So the goals are focused on increasing the supply of affordable rental housing, which is, a lot of the studies, the Bowen report identifies as the single biggest affordable housing need in the county, but also affordable home ownership opportunities, especially for increasing minority home ownership. Preserving the supply of what we describe as naturally occurring affordable housing. These might be, mobile homes that were built in the community that are affordable, and our emergency home repair program. A lot of that's focused on allowing folks to safely remain in their homes. So providing, but if you have a roof on your, if you have a hole in your roof or other things that would endanger them or make them not safe, it's a way to address those so that people can stay in their homes. Over the last several weeks, in our last couple of meetings, we've also been very focused on looking at issues around homelessness. Obviously, a big and complex issue in the community. The high-level goal that we want to support is for the county to support achieving functional zero homelessness, and we can have more detailed discussion around what that concept means. And then another key concern, challenge, and opportunity is around greater utilization of the vouchers that our community is eligible for. The Federal Housing Voucher Program is one of the big national programs to help people access affordable housing. And currently, the scarcity of affordable housing and landlords who accept vouchers means we're not actually able to fully utilize all the vouchers that our community is eligible for. So trying to bridge that gap so that we can fully utilize that voucher program is another key goal. All right, and so the specific goals, next slide, please. All right, so the specific goals that the committee wants to bring forward for consideration by the commission is that it's set for basically an 8-year goal. So between 2022 and 2030, our recommendations are that the county set a goal we are directly impacting between 2,800 and 3,150 affordable housing units. And the different categories of that, first in the affordable rental space, where we're talking about affordable rental units that would be affordable to residents who make 80% of area median income or less, but that the average affordability of that would be at the 60% area median income level, which is so we're meaning very affordable units. You know, if you look at just the difference of like rents between 80% and 100%, it might seem like actually still pretty high rent. So, but we're talking about very, you know, very good levels of affordability as the average we're setting for this big stretch goal of the county. And within that, and also within that overall goal, we've talked about the importance of bringing more of the low-income housing tax credit program to Buncombe County, leverages a tremendous amount of additional resources to our community. So the number of units developed through that program would be in the 1,200 to 1,480 range. And if we are able to achieve that, that will bring an estimated $100 to $120 million of additional equity to our community to invest in these projects. At our last meeting, we also developed the specific goal that within the larger number, at least 200 of these units would be affordable to folks who make less than 30% of area median income. So, you know, so very lower income individuals. A lot of these might be folks who are coming out of a homelessness situation or other situation where they have very low income. So it's just within this space, there's a range of affordability from 80% all the way down to, you know, some of the poorest folks in our community. All right, on the home ownership goal, the recommendation is for 400 units that would be affordable, home ownership units that would be affordable to families making less than 80% of AMI. On the home repair program, that we would support 500 home repair projects in this time frame, again, to residents making 80% of AMI or less. And then also for what, you know, we sometimes refer to as workforce housing, or folks that are kind of more in the moderate income range of 80% to 120% AMI, that we'd support an additional 400 units, which could be both a combination of apartments as well as home ownership projects. All right, so those are the high-level goals that we're recommending. And now this slide looks at, and I realize this is kind of, there's a lot on this slide, so I'll just, I'll walk through this real quick. So what's the budget to do this? Like, what's the investment level needed to achieve these goals? And obviously, as we're thinking about, a process going to play out over 8 years, by its very nature, these are estimates, right? Construction costs change. Right now, they're really high. Hopefully, they'll settle down. And the way we see these projects work, we see a wide range of costs. So these are averages based on the best available information we have. But we want to provide some sense of the neighborhood of investment needed. So on the big stretch goal around affordable rental units of 1,850, we're estimating that the typical unit will cost about $40,000 per unit for the folks at the 60% average AMI. So that would be $74 million, the total cost, the total local cost needed to build that significant number of units over between now and 2030. The 400 home ownership units, based on projects we're seeing, or assuming an average cost of about $45,000 of local funding that would need to go into that, so about $18 million. The home repair projects are, relatively affordable compared to, constructing a whole new unit. So those average about $6,000 per unit. So to do the 500 projects would be an estimated $3 million. And then the 400 home ownership or rental units for moderate income households, we're assuming an average cost of $10,000 per unit. So that would be $4 million to support those 400 units. So if you add up all of those different items, the total local investment required would be a total of $99 million between now and 2030. So when we did the presentation a little over a month ago, we also, talked about, the county's not in this alone. We've got some strong partners. The city of Asheville is very involved in this space, passed a bond referendum that they're involved in deploying now. We've got some strong philanthropic partners, and there is some other public funding, like the Home Consortium funding that comes to Buncombe County and a couple of our neighboring counties each year. So we've done some more refinement of this. I think the presentation we initially gave assumed that maybe the county's investing half and the other half comes from other sources. So we looked a little more carefully at each of those other funding sources to say, realistically, how much revenue do we think we can realistically expect from the other sources? And when we went through that process in a little bit more detail, we believe that the other strategic partners in the region are likely to invest $45 million between now and 2030, looking at how much they invest annually, looking at the bond funding that the city has not yet spent. We went through each of those different sources. So of the 99 million, we think about 45 million is likely to be invested from strategic partners. So that would leave an estimated county-level investment to achieve these goals of $54 million between now and 2030, which is very similar to what we talked about in the original presentation. So the numbers have changed slightly, but didn't move fundamentally up or down significantly. Again, when we think about, okay, so the 54 million from the county, well, what are the different ways the county could assemble those funds? We're currently investing $2.3 million annually in our budget. So if we simply maintain that between now and 2030, that'll be a little over $18 million. We've also got the ARPA funds, and we've invested $8 million of ARPA funding to date, and we're going to do the second round of ARPA funding, so that's another revenue source. We've also previously talked about the various county land assets that we have that we could contribute, and we've provided some information about, the estimated values of those county-owned lands. And then, we've also had discussion about the feasibility of a potential bond referendum. So those are the different potential funding sources that could be looked at to pursue the county's portion of this. And then the last note on this slide is just to point out that while these are very, we think, ambitious but achievable goals, even if we achieve every one of these goals, we do not want to represent that this will solve the affordable housing challenges we have in our community. The identified needs in the community significantly exceed these goals. So even if we achieve them all, we do believe it would reverse the trends that we see in our community of every year, the scarcity of affordable housing growing, the gap in affordable housing getting worse. That's been the trend in our community for years and years, as we've all seen. We do think these would reverse some of those trends, but significant needs would still remain. And that is just to say, if we are able to achieve these goals, if it would be great as we start tracking on this if we're able to exceed them, because there's still a significant need above and beyond this. And then the other point that we wanted to make is that there are other needs as well. And the committee is working on development of some of those. Some of them are related to issues around homelessness and the need for emergency shelter beds, as just one example. But there's more time needed to develop really well thought out goals and budget estimates with those. So those will come in the future. But these are the goals that after working on this about 6 months, we felt like are ready to present and represent, big parts of the need in the community around affordable housing. So that's what we want to talk about at the regular meeting tonight, and just wanted to kind of go through that and preview that before our meeting this evening. So Amanda, any other thoughts you would share right now, or commissioners, any questions?
I have two small questions.
Sure.
Yeah, this is, first of all, just very exciting, and thank you all and to staff for the heavy lifting on this. I guess my assumption would be that you all would want us to pursue all those strategies simultaneously, right?
Around the funding strategies? or
I
around
actually meant the
goals?
sort of on-the-ground strategies, like or I wondered if you had, or if it felt like in years 1 through 4, we would prioritize strategies X, Y, and Z.
We haven't really talked about that specifically, but I think the working assumption is that we would be working to make progress on each of those goals every year.
Awesome.
And some of them might get more emphasis in some years than others, but there would be, in the way that we've done the way we currently do the Affordable Housing Services Program solicitations, it identifies all these goals we have and invites the community to apply to them. And they're all, I think, big enough goals that you wouldn't want many years to go by where you're not making some progress on each of them, or you would be in danger of falling behind. And
Right, I think as we think about the needs that we have amongst that continuum of housing, that it would make sense that we would be looking at each of those simultaneously rather than just focusing on rental units or just on home ownership, that we would want to look at the continuum of the needs.
I mean, with that said, I mean, one note is that the bigger stretch piece of this is definitely around the affordable rental piece, because it would require a bigger increase in that space than in the other spaces. So that is one area that as we're working on this, thinking about how do we make sure we get off to a good start on that, because that will be, I mean, just objectively, it's the biggest growth area for us. So, I mean, I think it warrants, early attention to make sure, hey, we've got a good plan, because it's the most ambitious of the different changes to our current, compared to kind of where we're at the moment.
And my follow-up question, which don't need to answer right now, but just as we move forward in discussions, I'd love to learn about is what you all are learning about sort of the economy, the efficiencies of scale within that space. I know there's been a lot of emphasis on the 4% projects, but if there's also thoughts about, well, projects that include X number of apartments will help us get to that goal faster, or if we really imagine that it'll be just sort of a wide array of affordable renting housing options. And again, that can be stuff we drill into later, but just sort of interested in drilling down on that top line goal, the largest one, to keep learning more about the types of projects that we might be looking to prioritize or support within that line.
I think we're going to continue to learn as we go on this for sure. I mean, that whole 4% program is still pretty new to us. There's only been a few of them developed so far. I mean, just interestingly though, because we have an RFP that's out now that the deadline on it recently closed. So the applications for the Affordable Housing Services Program just recently closed. We have a really robust set of projects, way more asks than we have money for. So difficult decisions as usual about that. But just interestingly, there is one new 4% project that was brought forward in that cycle. It's one of besides the Lee Walker Heights redevelopment, which of course we partnered on with the city, which involved kind of removal of the obsolete housing plus building some new ones. This would be by far the biggest, just pure new construction project under the 4% program that's, I think, been built here. In terms of just new units. Lee Walker Heights was bigger in totality with the replacement plus some new. So it's like 158 units, and the request to the county on that project is just $15,000 per unit. And I believe it doesn't contemplate funding from other sources either. So it's just one project, and we haven't even gotten through all the due diligence on it yet, but it's interesting in that it is a larger project that would produce a lot of very affordable units at a relatively, at an average cost quite a bit below what we're anticipating we would need to hit as an average across multiple projects, multiple years. So it's interesting and encouraging in some ways to see a project like that go forward.
The concern I have is when we talk about building affordable rental units, I look at what we're doing now, the units we're building. But darn, we're one of the highest areas in the state for rental, for apartments. How do we control that?
Well, with the projects that the county would fund, so if you're getting county funding, then we would have requirements in the deeds for these developments that would require them to remain affordable long-term, either 30 years, or in some cases, we might even negotiate a requirement for permanent, even beyond 30 years of affordability. So that would be a contractual obligation that they would have to enter into to guarantee the levels of affordability that.
Because I think when you look at how long they're going to be affordable, it should be permanently. We should be pushing more for that, because now, 15 years? And when you're talking about in terms of housing, 15 years is a short time.
That's true. These are very long-lived assets, so we're gonna seek that for the maximum period of time that we can. And but great question. And every project, that will be something that needs to be looked at. Generally speaking, I think part of the trade-offs there is that if you want to go permanent, then in some cases you might have to invest more, because basically the property owner's agreeing like, hey, our rents will never ever be beyond what's defined here. So So they're giving up future income in return for agreeing to do that. And so then you have to look at what's the investment level needed to do that. But it'll either be very long-term or permanent, I think, in the vast majority of cases that the county would.
Because especially if you look at building on county land or city land, that should all be permanent. Should be no excuse for that not being permanent.
And we could deed restrict it to do that. That's right.
Yeah.
Any other initial questions for now? We'll talk about it again after 5 o'clock. But great. Well, thanks, everybody. We appreciate it, and we'll come back to it at the regular meeting. So we've gotten through all of our agenda items, so we have time for a brief break before our regular meeting begins.